Sirens flashed blue against the pines as the sheriff handed my father the notice. He stared at the paper. I didn't raise my voice. I pressed play. On my phone, his own message played back his promise to get rid of this place for the family's good. The deputy glanced at him, then at me. "Ma'am, you're within your rights." My father lowered his eyes. That was the moment everything turned. But the story didn't start there. I retired from the Navy on a Tuesday in late March, the kind of sky scrubbed clean by a cold front. 20 years of logistics moving ships' people fuel collapsed into a box labeled personal. I drove north with the radio off, letting the tires hum out the years I'd given to orders and alarms. Cody, Wyoming didn't ask for a performance. It offered a hardware shop that smelled like cedar and coffee strong enough to fog your glasses. The real estate office belonged to Rebecca Marsh, quick-eyed and kind. She slid a key across the desk. "Congratulations, Commander Holt. Welcome to Park County." The cabin sat 12 miles out where pavement thinned into gravel and cell service fell away. Weathered cedar, green metal roof, stone chimney blackened by winters. I stood on the porch with the key in my palm and listened. No sirens, no ship horns, just wind through pine and a woodpecker somewhere I couldn't see. I unlocked the door and inhaled the resin scent of sap and old smoke. One room for a table and a rocking chair, a small bedroom, a bathroom with a stubborn latch. Perfect. I unpacked the way I was trained systems first. Tools on the pegboard by function, books by subject, coffee maker placed where morning light would hit at 0600. My metals proof I'd served without quitting went into a small box at the back of the closet. I didn't need their shine out here, I needed quiet. At dusk, elk stitched shadows across the clearing. I made coffee I didn't need and drank it anyway. I called my daughter to say I'd arrived. We talked about her students and spring tomatoes. I slept with the window cracked and dreamed of nothing. The call came the next afternoon while I was chalk-lining shelves in the workshop. The screen said, "Dad." I almost let it roll to voicemail. I answered anyway. "We're moving in with you," he said, skipping hello. "You don't need that big house all to yourself." The chalk snapped in my fingers. "Dad, I bought this place for family," he said. "That's what you should have done 20 years ago instead of chasing ribbons. Your aunt will come up next month. Your cousin, too. Plenty of room. The same authority that told 12-year-old me to stop crying at Mom's funeral. The same tone that made 19-year-old me swear I'd never again take orders that weren't earned." I didn't argue. I wrote the date in my pocket notebook and underlined it twice. "Drive safe," I said, and hung up. The quiet returned in one stunned piece. I brewed coffee and sat at the table with the green grid notebook I'd used 1,000 times. I labeled the first page, Field Log. Under it, 3 columns, facts, options, costs. It calmed me how boxes and lines made a problem behave. By the time the cup went cold, I knew where to begin. The county building sat off Main Brick and Practical. I requested certified copies of my deed and a printout of local nuisance and trespass statutes. The clerk asked if I needed anything else. "A map with boundary lines," I said. He pulled one. I rolled it and slid it into my rucksack. From there, I drove to the ranger station. Displays of wolves and elk migrations lined the walls. A woman ranger, sun-browned competent, talked about food storage and how sound carries in timber. "People underestimate how far a voice travels out here," she said. I nodded. I wasn't planning to shout. At the hardware store, I bought lag bolts, motion lights, 2 lock sets, keyed-alike, and a metal cash box. The clerk mentioned spring bears. I told him I'd keep the trash sealed tight. He didn't need to know the lights were for humans, not bears. Back home, I installed a deadbolt on the bedroom and another on the utility closet. I mounted motion lights over the porch and the drive approach. I labeled folders and fed them receipts, serial numbers, and copies of my emergency contacts. I placed a spiral notebook next to the landline and wrote incident log on the cover. Navy muscle memory applied to civilian life. That night, I wrote a letter to my late mother. "I hope you'd be proud of the woman who wants a quiet life," I wrote. "Dad thinks quiet is selfish. Maybe he's afraid of what he hears when nobody's talking." I folded the page and tucked it into the box with my medals. 3 days later, my father's truck ground up the drive with that old exhaust leak I could identify blindfolded. His second wife sat passenger, frowning at the dust. He climbed out without looking at the view. He didn't ask to come in. He held out his hand like a foreman expecting keys to a crane. "Let's get the boxes," he said. "We'll set up the back bedroom. Your aunt comes in 2 weeks." I smiled pleasantly enough to be mistaken for weak. "You'll want to see something first," I said, and stepped aside so they could enter. The cabin smelled like coffee and lemon oil. The table held 3 neat stacks county statutes, certified deed copies, and a list titled House Rules. Beside them lay a digital recorder and a pen. My father's eyes flicked from the papers to my face. He opened his mouth. I didn't say a word. Months later, there would be sirens, the deputy's steady voice, the legal notice he would accept with hands that finally trembled. But in that first hour, there was only my quiet, and the documents and the wind threading the trees like a hymn. I set a mug on the table without coffee in it and waited. He'd speak. He always did. This time I would let the law speak back. By the time my father's truck disappeared into the trees that evening, I had memorized every sound it made, the loose muffler, the rattle of tools in the back, the slow fade of tires over gravel. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, like a room that had just been shouted in. 2 days later they came back, for good. They didn't knock. The screen door banged open and my father's voice filled the cabin before his boots did. "We brought the rest of it. Get the back cleared. That'll be our room." His wife Marlene trailed behind him, carrying grocery bags, already judging everything from the curtains to the dust. I'd scrubbed the cabin, set up shelves, stocked coffee and tea. It still looked too plain for her. "It's rustic," she said, drawing out the word as if it were a medical condition. Dad dropped a cooler by the stove. "It'll do. Beats paying rent. We'll fix it up." He meant take over. I helped unload boxes labeled kitchen, office, den. They brought a coffee table that didn't fit a fake fireplace, 2 folding chairs, and a sense of entitlement that could heat the place by itself. At dinner he told me I was too quiet for company. When I offered to make stew, he waved me off. "We'll order pizza. They deliver out here, right?" "They don't," I said. He looked at me like I'd failed basic logistics. "You're telling me you bought land 12 miles from town with no delivery service?" "I wanted quiet," I said. He laughed. "Yeah, and look how that turned out." Over the next week, small things vanished from where I'd left them. My Navy coffee mug, the field log, the folded letter to Mom. I found the letter under a stack of old mail on the counter, creased opened. "You still writing to your mother?" he asked that evening. I never stopped. He shook his head. "You've been on your own too long. You think too much." Maybe he was right. Thinking had kept me alive through deployments, supply shortages, and one engine fire off Diego Garcia. It would keep me alive now. On Saturday, he started redecorating. My framed map of the North Atlantic came down, replaced by his hunting trophies, a pronghorn skull, and a photo of him beside a 12-point elk from 1989. "I need reminders of accomplishment," he said. "You can hang your Navy stuff in your room." I'd boxed my medals on purpose. He mistook that for shame. It was restraint. Marlene decided to freshen the space. She sprayed something floral that clashed with pine and coffee. She turned up the thermostat to 78. When I turned it back to 68, she complained about her arthritis. I bought her an electric blanket. She never plugged it in. She liked the argument more than the warmth. By the second week, I started each morning with coffee and a checklist titled Tolerances. Noise tolerable. Invasion escalating. Patience measurable. The list steadied me like morning prayer. He began bringing up my Navy career more often, as if peeling an old scar. "You spent 20 years taking orders from strangers. Couldn't take one from your own family. I took orders from people who earned it." That stopped him for exactly 5 seconds. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said, "just trained differently." The air thickened. Marlene clattered dishes in the sink to fill the silence. After he went outside, I opened my logbook. Conflict escalating. Subject asserts authority based on age, not ownership. Respond with silence. The habit of documentation wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. When emotions rise, facts drown. The next morning, he brought home 2 folding cots and announced your aunt's coming for the summer. I didn't invite her. "She needs fresh air. We'll make space." "This isn't a resort, Dad." He scowled. "It's family property." I slid the certified deed across the table. "No, it's mine." He didn't look down. "You always were ungrateful." He walked out, leaving the paper like something contagious. That evening, I drove into Cody. The county courthouse lights were still on. I requested another certified copy of the deed, a duplicate of my property tax receipt, and copies of the boundary map I'd already filed. The clerk looked at me like I was preparing for war. Maybe I was. On the way home, I stopped by the ranger station. The same woman was there cleaning coffee mugs. "You settling in?" she asked. "Mostly," I said. "If someone trespasses family or not, what's the procedure?" "Document everything," she said. "Time date photos if you can. Keep records." I smiled faintly. "Already do." Back at the cabin, the porch light glowed against a sea of moths. Inside, my father sat in my rocking chair with a beer boots on the table. "You've been gone," he said. "Errands." He pointed the beer at me. "You better not be running to lawyers. We're family." "I was at the ranger station." "For what?" "Wildlife updates." He snorted. "You always did like playing soldier." I looked at him and saw the boy who'd once saluted the flag with me at the 4th of July parade, proud that his daughter wore uniform whites. Somewhere along the way, pride had soured into resentment. "You can stay," I said quietly, "but the rules on the table stand." He waved his hand. "Rules? You sound like a manual." He didn't know manuals kept ships from sinking. That night I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan ticked like a metronome for anger. I walked onto the porch, cold air biting my arms. The stars were sharp enough to cut. I whispered to the trees what I couldn't say to him. I wanted peace, not permission. The forest didn't answer, but the silence did. It wrapped around me like armor. At dawn, I wrote in the log, "If peace is to survive, boundaries must become visible." I didn't know then that those words would become prophecy. By mid-April, the cabin no longer smelled like pine and coffee. It smelled like conflict. Marlene filled the sink with lavender soap that made the walls sticky sweet. Dad's television blared hunting shows from sunrise until he fell asleep in the chair. I started keeping earbuds handy, though silence remained my real defense. He called it the family home now. I corrected him once softly. "It's my home." He laughed. "Don't be territorial. You've got plenty." That night I logged the quote word for word. Small things fractured first. My coffee beans replaced by flavored ones. My workbench reorganized without asking. When I tried to fix the old gate, Dad took the wrench from my hand. "You've done enough. I'll handle this." The gate stayed broken for 2 weeks. At dinner, he told stories that began with back when people respected their elders. He never noticed how Marlene's eyes glazed over. She'd married him for stability, not for sermons. Once, when he dozed off, she whispered, "You could have been my daughter if life had twisted differently." I pretended not to hear. A letter arrived addressed to George Holt, Park County property owner. He opened it before I saw it. Real estate advertisement harmless, but he studied it too long. Later, I caught him taking pictures of the cabin with his phone. "What are you doing, just seeing what it's worth? It's not for sale." He shrugged. "Everything's for sale if the price is right." That night, I moved the deed and title copies into the safe. My hands didn't shake. 20 years in the Navy had taught me to act calm before storms. When the weather turned, they started complaining about the road. "We need the county to pave it," Marlene said. "Our car's getting ruined." "It's private," I said. "They won't pave it." "Then you should pay someone," Dad answered. "You've got savings." It wasn't the words, it was the presumption. I looked at him and saw a man who couldn't stand not being in charge even in someone else's house. That night I sat at the table writing in the logbook. Authority asserted through dependency. Pattern identical to command inversion in Logistics Crisis 2009. My handwriting was steady, mechanical. It comforted me. 2 weeks later, Dad invited my cousins for a family weekend. 4 adults, 2 kids, and a Labrador arrived in a caravan of noise. They dragged coolers onto the porch and set up lawn chairs like they were claiming territory. Surprised, Dad said, grinning. "I told them you'd love it." I didn't love it. The dog chewed through the porch screen. The kids scattered crayons across my floor maps. When I tried to fix the door, Dad announced loudly, "She's fussy about order, Navy thing." Everyone laughed. That evening I walked into the woods until the voices faded. The trees stood indifferent, their silence thick. The anger passed through me like current, leaving only resolve. Monday morning, the relatives left. The quiet that followed felt artificial, like a stage after a play. Dad sipped coffee and said, "They had a great time. Maybe we'll do it again next month." I didn't answer. I simply opened my notebook and wrote May 3rd, threshold crossed. That afternoon, I drove into Cody again. The courthouse clerk greeted me by name. "Back already, need duplicates," I said, "for personal records." This time, I also asked about power of attorney procedures, property trusts, and noise ordinances. She gave me pamphlets. I read every word that night. Marlene grew uneasy. "He's talking about selling again," she told me quietly while he was outside chopping wood. "He thinks if you move closer to town, everyone can live together." "I'm not moving," I said. "He's not listening anymore." "I know." She hesitated. "He loves you, you know. I believe he loves control more." Her silence agreed with me. A week later, the argument happened. Not shouting, just final. He stood by the fireplace holding his phone. "Got a realtor lined up. You'll thank me when this place sells for double." "You don't own it." He waved the phone. "You'll sign. You owe the family that much." I looked him dead in the eye. "I owe no one my peace." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he muttered, "Maybe you should have stayed in the Navy where someone could still give you orders." He left the room, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the walls. I exhaled slowly and opened my logbook. Escalation confirmed. That night I sat on the porch, the same chair where I'd first watched elk graze. The stars were sharp, mercilessly honest. I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was operational. The old Navy switch had flipped. Problem, plan, execution. I turned the page and started a new section strategy. 1. Secure legal counsel. 2. Transfer deed into trust. 3. Gather evidence of coercion attempts. 4. Maintain composure. When I finished the list, I underlined the last phrase twice. Inside the TV droned a hunting show. Dad laughed at something loud and cruel. I poured a cup of coffee and stood in the doorway watching him. The glow from the screen carved deep lines in his face. For the first time, I felt something like pity. He didn't see what was coming because he never imagined I could outplan him. I closed the notebook, placed it beside the deed, and whispered the Navy motto I'd carried for 2 decades, Semper Fortis. Always courageous. The next morning dawned with the stillness of a held breath. Frost clung to the porch railing, and the sky was a pale, washed-out blue that promised another cold snap. Dad had taken the truck to town. Marlene stayed behind, pretending to dust, but mostly pacing. The silence between us felt like a shared secret neither wanted to name. When the gravel crunch finally faded down the driveway, I exhaled. It was time to move from thought to operation. I drove into Cody and parked outside a low brick building with a faded sign, Carver and Lang Property and Estate Law. The receptionist smiled politely as I signed in. "Commander Holt," she asked, glancing at my ID. "Retired," I said. "But habits die hard." Mr. Carver looked exactly like someone who'd spent 30 years reading fine print, steady eyes, plaid shirt, calm voice. I told him about the cabin, the deed, the threats to sell it for the family, and how I hadn't raised my voice once. He listened without interrupting, jotting notes in neat block letters. When I finished, he said, "You're not overreacting. You're establishing control. I don't want a war," I said. He smiled faintly. "Good. People who don't want war usually win it fastest. We'll set up a revocable trust, keeps ownership locked in your name. If he tries to sign anything, it won't hold." He handed me a folder labeled Trust Formation Documents. "Keep records of every incident," he added. "Dates, statements, witnesses if possible." Silence is powerful, Commander, but paperwork wins courtrooms. I almost laughed. That's what we said in logistics. Back at the cabin, I found Dad in the yard, stacking firewood like a general inspecting troops. "Where have you been, Town?" I said. "Groceries." He eyed the folder under my arm. "That doesn't look like groceries. Paperwork. You wouldn't like it." He shrugged. "As long as you're not making trouble." I smiled. Never. The next days unfolded like drills. I updated the incident log every night, writing as if for a commanding officer. Dates, times, quotes. I printed copies of the trust paperwork and stored them in a weatherproof container in the shed. I replaced my small motion lights with full security cameras, ostensibly to watch for bears. When the UPS driver dropped off the boxes, Dad laughed. "You expecting an invasion, always good to be prepared." He grunted. "You're obsessed with control." Maybe. But I'd learned control was how peace survived. By late May, spring thawed into mud and mosquitoes. Dad grew restless, frustrated that the realtor had stopped calling him back. He didn't know I'd visited her myself, explaining the property's legal status. She apologized for the confusion and promised to lose his messages. One evening, as I scrubbed the kitchen counter, Marlene spoke without turning. "He's talking to your cousin again. About money." I kept my voice even. What money he thinks if he sells the place they can invest together. And live where she sighed. You know how he is. The plan doesn't matter, being right does. I rinsed the sponge and said quietly, "Then I'll make sure he runs out of things to be right about." That night I wrote my mother again. "He's building arguments instead of fences. I'm building evidence." I sealed the page in the envelope and placed it in the box beside my medals. The next morning I found the envelope moved. Not opened, just turned sideways. Someone had touched it. That was enough. I installed a small keypad lock on the closet. When Dad noticed, he chuckled. "Keeping secrets." "Keeping order," I said. He shook his head. "You've been alone too long." "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm so good at it." By June, the pattern was set: provocation, silence, note-taking. He accused me of coldness. I offered coffee. He complained about the Wi-Fi. I installed a stronger password. Each small measure bought me space to think. One afternoon, Marlene knocked softly on my door. "He's furious. The realtor cut contact." "I know. He thinks you interfered." I folded the laundry. "Did he say what he'll do next?" "He said he might call a lawyer." "Good," I said. "So did I." She hesitated. "You're not trying to ruin him, are you?" I met her eyes. "No, I'm trying to teach him that respect is mutual or it's nothing." That night, Dad slammed a drawer and shouted something about ungrateful daughters. I stayed in my room listening. When his footsteps faded, I turned on the small recorder beside the lamp just in case. Old Navy Habit record transmissions, even when you think no one's listening. The next morning he acted like nothing had happened. He asked if I wanted pancakes. I said yes. Peace sometimes looked like breakfast. While he flipped the pancakes, I walked outside to the shed and tested the locks. Everything held. The legal papers were dry and intact. I breathed in the clean air and realized my pulse wasn't racing anymore. The situation hadn't improved, but I had. The chaos outside had stopped rewriting my calm. That week I mailed the signed trust documents to Carver's office. He called 2 days later. "It's done. The cabin's under your name only. No one else can touch it without consent." "Thank you," I said. "You did the hard part," he replied. "You stayed quiet." I hung up and stared out the window. Dad was in the yard hammering a crooked board into the fence, fixing something that wasn't broken as usual. I almost smiled. That evening, as the sun bled out behind the pines, I wrote a single line in my logbook: mission parameters secured. Maintain silence until provoked. I set down my pen, closed the book, and watched the last light fade off the hills. Somewhere in town, my lawyer was filing my protection. Somewhere in this cabin, my father was plotting his next move. The difference was that I had already won the first battle without a word spoken. The shift came quietly like frost creeping across a window. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a colder tone in Dad's voice, a stiffness in his shoulders when he passed me in the hall. He'd sensed the tide turning, even if he couldn't name why. By late June, he stopped pretending I was in charge of my own home. "It started with the truck keys. I'll take it into town," he said one morning, hand already out. "I've got errands," I said. "Then we'll go together. I prefer going alone." He grinned, but his voice held steel. "You're acting secretive and I don't like it." He took the keys off the hook and left before I could stop him. I stood there, coffee cooling in my hand, watching gravel dust rise down the drive. Old instincts stirred the kind honed when an operation went off plan. Assess, adjust, proceed. When he came back that evening, the gas tank was half empty. I checked the truck bed. My folder, the one with maintenance receipts, was gone. "Lose something?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Just organizing your mess. You hoard paper like a bureaucrat. I need those receipts. You need less paranoia." I went to the truck again later. The folder was under the seat, folded, slightly torn. The smell of his cologne lingered on the pages. It wasn't about the papers, it was about the message. I can reach your things. That night I installed a small interior camera inside the truck hidden under the rearview mount. Just motion detection, no audio. The Navy taught me that evidence is the quietest ally. A week later, the propane delivery came. The driver asked who'd called in the cancellation. I hadn't. Dad watched from the porch as I signed the reinstatement form. Miscommunication, he said casually. Didn't think we needed that much gas in summer. It's prepaid through November. He shrugged. Just trying to help you save. I smiled, but inside the line snapped sabotage confirmed. That evening I cleaned the shed. Each task was deliberate sweeping sawdust, oiling hinges, checking the waterproof container where my trust documents rested. I added new labels, evidence log. I documented every interference propane call truck entry, missing receipts. I took photos, printed timestamps, filed copies in triplicate. When I closed the container, I felt calm, not angry, just precise. Marlene found me later. He's talking to your brother now, she said. He told him you're unstable. Let him, I said. Stability's measurable. Her face softened with pity. He's scared. Of getting old. Of losing control. I know, I said. But fear doesn't justify invasion. Sunday came heavy with heat. I sat on the porch watching sunlight pool between the trees when Dad walked out carrying his duffel bag. We're heading to Billings for a few days, he said. House hunting. House hunting somewhere bigger. Family needs room. This isn't your property, Dad. He smirked. We'll see what the realtor says. They drove off in Marlene's sedan. I sat there a long moment, then stood and whispered, perfect. The next 48 hours became a campaign. I replaced the old brass locks with digital deadbolts. I backed up every camera feed onto a flash drive and hid it in a hollow log behind the cabin. I updated my will designating the trust as sole heir. Then I drove into Cody, met with Carver, and added one more layer restraining clause, no access without invitation. Going all in, he said. They declared war, I answered. He nodded slowly. Then make sure you win without firing a shot. When Dad and Marlene returned, the new locks blinked red. What's this? He barked. Security upgrade, I said from the porch. You change the code, I change it regularly. Standard practice. He dropped his duffel, face red. You think you can shut me out of my own family's home? It's my home, Dad. Not anymore. He shoved past me, but the door didn't budge. He hit it again, palm slamming the frame. Open this door, I will, I said softly when you remembered a knock. The stillness afterward was louder than any argument. Even Marlene didn't move. Finally, he turned, stormed to the truck, and drove off again. The dust swallowed him whole. I stood in the yard, heart steady. Then I opened my phone and scrolled to the security app. The cameras caught everything, his shouting, his shove, his anger. I uploaded the clip to the cloud and labeled it June Incident Number 4. That night, Marlene knocked gently. He's staying in town, she said. At the motel by the gas station. Good, she hesitated. He told the clerk, you're unstable, that you lock people out for no reason. I document reasons, I said. She looked at me sadly. He won't stop until he feels small again. I poured her tea. Then he'll keep going forever. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from fear, strategy kept me awake. If Dad wanted a confrontation, I'd give him proof instead. If he wanted dominance, I'd show him discipline. I wrote in my log, objective, de-escalate through precision. Truth will serve as weapon. The next morning I found Marlene on the porch crying quietly. He told me not to come back, she whispered. Said I was taking your side. You can stay here as long as you need. She nodded, wiping her eyes. He doesn't know who you are anymore. I stared at the tree line. Neither does he. Inside the cabin felt cleaner, quieter. The air smelled like cedar again. Peace had returned, but it was fragile, held together by boundaries and the quiet hum of recorded proof. I knew Dad would come back. I just didn't know when or how far he'd go. So I waited silent, prepared the way a sailor waits for the storm he knows is already forming beyond the horizon. By early July, I stopped hoping for peace and started preparing for permanence. Silence became my uniform, again measured, composed, functional. It kept the edges of emotion from fraying. I woke before sunrise every day, made coffee, and reviewed my logs like mission reports. Each note was evidence, each photo a weapon I hoped I'd never have to use. Dad's texts started coming every morning. "You owe us this. Family doesn't need paperwork. You're embarrassing yourself." I didn't reply. Every message auto-saved to the same folder marked comms, hostile. By midweek, the tone changed. "I found a lawyer. You'll regret crossing me." I sent everything to Mr. Carver. His response came within an hour. "Let him escalate. We'll handle it." 2 days later, the county sheriff's truck appeared in my driveway. The officer stepped out friendly but cautious. "Ma'am, I'm here about a civil property inquiry. Your father filed a complaint." "I see," I said. "Would you like some coffee?" He blinked, unsure if I was joking. "Just need to verify ownership." I handed him a folder containing the trust paperwork and Carver's letter. The sheriff flipped through it, nodding slowly. "Everything looks solid. He's claiming you're mentally unfit to manage the property." I laughed softly. "He's been saying that since I was 12. The sheriff smiled despite himself. "For what it's worth, this looks like you're the sanest person in this whole situation. I'll close it as no action." When his truck left, I sat on the porch and let the July heat settle over me like armor. The law had spoken. It was the first real victory, and it tasted like quiet relief. That night, Marlene returned from town with groceries and exhaustion. "He's furious," she said. "The sheriff told him to back off. He's calling everyone in the family saying you forged papers." "I have witnesses," I said. "He doesn't care about proof. He cares about pride. Then he's running out of ammunition." I handed her a small envelope. Inside were the motel receipts I'd found, online proof he'd been using my address to claim family residency. She frowned. "You're not going to use these, are you, only if he keeps pushing?" The next morning, Dad's truck came roaring up the road. I didn't flinch. The cameras were already rolling. He jumped out before the engine died. "You think you can humiliate me with your lawyer tricks?" I stayed seated on the porch, hands still around my coffee cup. "You filed a false report, Dad. That's not a trick. That's a crime." He jabbed a finger at me. "You've always thought you were smarter." "You're not." "No," I said calmly. "Just quieter." He stepped closer. His shadow fell over my boots. "Open the door." "No." He clenched his jaw. "You're choosing strangers over family. I'm choosing peace over chaos." His hand twitched like he might shove me again, but this time he saw the small red light blinking above the porch. "What's that security?" I said. "Everything's recorded." He froze. The old confidence drained from his face. For the first time, he looked unsure. He muttered something I didn't catch, turned and stomped back to his truck. The tires kicked gravel like angry punctuation. I sat there until the dust settled, then picked up my phone. The recording was perfect, clear audio, full video. I forwarded it to Carver and labeled it July 9th, Confrontation Visual Proof. Carver called that evening. "Commander Holt, this changes everything. You're officially protected under the trust and documented as the lawful resident. If he tries anything else, we can file a restraining order." "Do it quietly," I said. He paused. "You still want to avoid public embarrassment for him. Some wars aren't worth winning loudly. I'll file it under sealed review. You'll be notified next week." I thanked him and hung up. The phone felt heavy but clean in my hand, like the weight of a medal after a long deployment. 3 days later, Marlene packed her bags. "I'm going back to my sister's," she said. "He won't listen to me anymore. I can't live like this." I helped her load the car. "You don't have to explain." She hugged me tightly. "He's scared of you now. Not angry, scared. Maybe that's good for him." When she drove away, I stood in the silence that followed the woods, humming faintly with cicadas. For the first time since March, the cabin was mine again. I walked through each room slowly, the kitchen, the small bedroom, the workbench with neatly aligned tools. I whispered to no one, area secured. The legal envelope arrived the following Monday, order of limited contact. George Holt. The county court had approved it based on evidence of repeated harassment and documented attempts at coercion. I traced the embossed seal with my finger. It wasn't triumph, I felt it was steadiness, the kind that comes after months of weathering storms without breaking. That evening I poured 2 cups of coffee, though only one would be drunk. I sat on the porch and set the second cup beside the empty chair where Dad used to sit. The air smelled like rain on pine needles. I didn't want it this way, I said quietly to the wind, to the ghosts of all our arguments. But peace doesn't negotiate. I lifted my own cup, saluted the horizon, and took a long, slow sip. Later, I added one final note in my logbook before turning in phase complete. Threat neutralized through documentation, law, and silence. Maintain observation. Prepare for aftershock. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and lay awake listening to the forest breathe. For once, the silence didn't feel defensive. It felt earned. By August, summer baked the valley into silence. The cabin walls creaked in the heat, and resin from the logs gave off the faint scent of sap. It would have been peaceful again if not for the phone calls. They started with relatives. Ev, your father says you're having some sort of breakdown. I'm fine. He said you locked him out of his own home. I locked my own doors. Then came messages from family friends, some kind, some cutting. We're praying for you. He's just worried. You always were a bit controlling. Each call lasted less than a minute. Each one ended with the same click of finality before I wrote down the details, names, times, quotes. Another column in the growing spreadsheet I'd titled Reputation Offensive. 2 weeks passed before the next escalation. An unmarked sedan pulled up one morning while I was sanding the porch rail. A woman stepped out neatly dressed holding a clipboard. Commander Evelyn Holt. Yes, I'm Margaret Willows with Adult Protective Services. We received a welfare concern about your well-being. I stared at her for 3 long seconds, then smiled. Of course you did. Please come in. The visit lasted an hour. Margaret was polite but methodical, checking the refrigerator, the pantry, the bills stacked on the counter. She asked about medications, mental health finances. I handed her my recent bank statement, my medical clearance from last month, and the trust papers bearing the county seal. Her expression softened. This is unusually thorough documentation, Commander. I'm used to audits, I said. In the Navy proof outranked sympathy. She nodded slowly. I'll file this as unfounded. Thank you. Off the record, she said as she reached the door, this kind of complaint usually comes from family fighting over money. Then your record will match mine. When her sedan rolled away, I stood in the dust trail and whispered, retaliation confirmed. That evening, I drove into town and met with Carver at his office. He leaned back after hearing the details. Classic play, he said. Smear the caretaker, question their capacity, build a case for conservatorship. Can they try again? Not easily. APS findings are public record. You're cleared, and I'll make sure that letter is copied to the county clerk and your file. He slid me another envelope. Keep this safe, it's your shield. Back at the cabin, I poured bourbon into a chipped mug, 2 fingers, no ice. The silence outside was thick, almost electric. I walked to the porch and sat down. The mountains glowed in the dying light, peaceful and steady like judgment waiting patiently for its moment. My phone buzzed, another voicemail from Dad. You think a piece of paper makes you right, you're a disgrace. I raised you better. I didn't delete it. I saved it under voicemail 7, harassment tone, and uploaded it to the drive. Then I played it again, not for anger, but for calibration, listening to the cadence, the certainty, the weakness hiding underneath. It was the sound of a man losing control of his narrative. 3 days later, Margaret called again. I wanted to let you know, she said, the case is officially closed. The complaint was deemed malicious. We're forwarding it to the sheriff's office for record. I smiled. Justice moves quietly, but it moves. The next week I noticed new mail in the box addressed to George Holt at my address. I hadn't received anything in his name since he left. One envelope came from a credit union, another from the Department of Family Services. I didn't open them, just photographed each front and back, sealed them in a clear plastic sleeve, and called Carver. That, he said after I explained, is mail fraud if he's using your address for benefits. What do? Keep it sealed. Document everything. If there's a pattern, we'll take it federal. He paused. Commander, you realize this could end badly for him. I realize I didn't start it. That weekend, I noticed tire tracks near the mailbox that weren't mine. A fresh cigarette butt in the dirt. He'd been here close enough to feel present, but too cowardly to knock. The thought didn't scare me. It clarified things. I adjusted the camera angles to cover the road and mailbox, then recorded a video note into my phone. This is Evelyn Holt documenting potential trespassing activity August 19, 1900 hours. The act of speaking it aloud steadied me. In the Navy, you learned to narrate danger to keep it from owning you. Monday morning brought the email from Carver. County attorney reviewed your APS file. They're considering filing a harassment injunction if contact continues. Attached was the official closure report. Findings: subject competent, independent, no evidence of neglect or cognitive decline. Complaint appears retaliatory in nature. I printed the letter, framed it in an old brass photo frame, and set it on the mantel where Dad's hunting photo used to hang. The symmetry felt poetic. That night, a storm rolled in over the ridgeline, low thunder echoing through the valley. I sat by the window with a mug of tea, watching lightning flicker through the trees. Every flash lit up the log walls, the safe, the evidence folders, the small world I'd fortified with discipline and patience. Somewhere in town, he was probably pacing, angry at being outmaneuvered. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt about it. Before bed, I opened my logbook and wrote, "Retaliation neutralized through documentation, third-party validation, and lawful conduct. Pattern indicates continued escalation, unlikely to succeed." Then beneath it, smaller: "Victory doesn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it feels like silence, finally being left alone." I closed the book, blew out the lamp, and listened to the rain drumming softly on the roof, a sound that no one could claim, no one could twist, no one could take away. By mid-September, the first hints of fall crept into the trees. The aspen leaves at the ridge turned gold, and the air carried that dry electric scent that comes right before weather changes. Peace was returning, but it felt temporary, like a ceasefire waiting for someone to break it. It didn't take long. The phone rang at 6:14 a.m. I almost ignored it, but the caller ID, George Holt, froze my hand. I answered. "Dad!" His voice came through raw, frayed. "They're saying I could get charged for mail fraud. You reported me." I took a breath. "No, Dad. The law did. You used my address for benefits. That's illegal." He exhaled hard. "You could have warned me. I did. Many times. You wanted this to happen." "No," I said, quieter now. "I wanted peace. You wanted power." He hung up. I sat staring at the silent phone. The sun was just cresting the ridge, painting light through the steam of my untouched coffee. Instead of victory, I felt the hollow echo of finality. 2 hours later, the sheriff's office called. They confirmed federal investigators had opened a file. "Standard review," the deputy said. "Nothing for you to do, Ms. Holt, but it's serious." I thanked him and hung up. By afternoon, the first wave of family texts arrived. "How could you turn your own father in? He said you planted that mail yourself. This has gone too far." I ignored them all. There are moments in life when silence isn't avoidance, it's integrity. That evening, Marlene appeared at the gate. Her clothes were wrinkled, her expression pale. "Can we talk? Always?" I said. She sat on the porch steps, hands trembling. "He's not well. He won't sleep. Keeps saying you destroyed him." "I didn't," I said. "He did. He thinks you're going to have him arrested. The investigators will decide that, not me." She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "You could stop it, Evelyn. One phone call." "No," I said gently. "One phone call is how he started all this. He told me to move out of my own home. I'm done following orders." Marlene broke down, then quiet, controlled sobs that made me want to reach for her, but I didn't. Some comfort feels like betrayal to truth. 3 days later, my lawyer called. "Federal agents interviewed your father. He admitted using your address. They'll likely offer probation if he cooperates. And if he doesn't, then it escalates. But either way, you're in the clear." I thanked him and hung up, then walked outside. The mountains were already fading into twilight gold, slipping to gray. I whispered, "I don't want him punished. I just want this to end." The next morning, the knock came. When I opened the door, Dad stood there, no bravado left. He looked older, smaller, like the years had finally caught him. "I shouldn't have come," he said. "But I had to see you." "Come in," I said. He stepped inside, gaze drifting across the neat rows of evidence folders on my shelf. "You always were organized." "Learned it from you," I said softly. He sat at the table where we'd shared breakfast months ago. They said I could take a deal, pay a fine probation. I told them I'd take it. I don't want this hanging over your head. I never wanted it on yours. For a while, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked loud in the silence. Finally, he said, "You beat me." "It wasn't a competition, Dad. It was to me. You were supposed to need me. Instead, you became me and better." The words landed somewhere deep. I swallowed the ache before answering. I didn't want to be better. I just wanted to be left alone. He nodded slowly, eyes wet. "You're right. I was cruel. I thought control was love. Turns out it was fear." "I know," I said, "and I forgive you. But I won't let you live here again." He laughed once softly. "Didn't think you would." We talked until dusk, about Mom, about the Navy, about all the ways we'd misunderstood each other for decades. When he stood to leave, he looked stronger, like truth had lightened something inside him. At the door, he hesitated. "You'll visit me once I'm settled. If you let peace visit too," I said. He smiled for the first time in months. "Semper Fortis, huh? Always," I answered. That night I wrote in my logbook. Reckoning achieved without malice. Legal resolution pending. Emotional resolution in progress. Peace under reconstruction. Then I turned the page and added something I hadn't written before. Forgiveness is not surrender. It's engineering stability after impact. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office, case closed. Probation granted. Attached was a handwritten note in shaky penmanship. "I paid the fine, starting over. Thank you for not hating me, Dad." I set it beside the framed APS letter and the trust papers. 3 documents, 3 phases of survival, protection, vindication, closure. Outside, the aspen leaves were falling gold against the dark earth. For the first time, I didn't feel like defending the silence. I just let it exist. Peace like forgiveness didn't shout when it arrived. It simply sat beside me, quiet, steady, earned. October rolled in like a sigh. Mornings came cool in silver mist hugging the creek that cut behind the cabin. Every day the sunlight arrived a little later, but it felt cleaner now, like the air itself had forgiven me for the noise of the past year. I had coffee on the porch when I saw a familiar car crunching up the gravel road. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be Dad. But when the door opened, it was Marlene smiling, holding a paper bag. "Pumpkin muffins," she said. "From town." I smiled. The peace offering or the celebration? Both, she said, stepping inside like she'd never left. We talked over coffee for an hour. She told me Dad had rented a small apartment in Billings near the park. He's calmer now. Started volunteering at the VFW hall. Brags about you, actually. I blinked. About me, about how you handled things. Says you taught him boundaries the Navy never could. The words caught somewhere between relief and sadness. For the first time, I realized the fight had never been just about property, it was about legacy. He wanted to be remembered as strong. I wanted to live without fear. Somehow we'd both gotten a little of what we needed. Later that week, a letter arrived addressed in Dad's hand. I hesitated before opening it. Inside were just 3 lines. "The mountains were right, silence can be a teacher. Thank you for giving me one last lesson. I'm proud of you, Commander. Dad." I sat on the porch a long while after reading it, the letter trembling slightly in the breeze. For months I'd built walls of documentation, affidavits, recordings. Now the only evidence that mattered was ink and apology. Days fell into rhythm again. I split wood in the mornings, fixed fences, and walked the ridge before dusk. The elk came back in small herds, grazing fearlessly near the clearing. One afternoon I even caught myself humming an old Navy hymn I hadn't sung since deployment. The quiet no longer felt defensive, it felt like home. One Sunday I invited Marlene to dinner. We ate stew at the table where arguments had once been fired like gunshots. She looked around and said softly, "It feels lighter here." "It is," I said. "Maybe it's because no one's trying to win anymore." She nodded. "He wants to visit for Thanksgiving, just a day trip, no staying overnight." I thought about it, then smiled. "Tell him to bring pie." Thanksgiving came. Dad arrived with a pumpkin pie and an awkward smile. His gait was slower, but his eyes clearer. He handed me a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a tarnished brass compass, his from the Navy in 1972. The engraving read, "Return to True North." "Thought you should have it," he said. I ran my thumb over the worn metal. "You sure?" he nodded. "You've earned it. You found your own north even when I lost mine." I didn't cry then, but later that night after they left, I sat on the porch holding that compass until the stars blurred. Winter crept down from the mountains by December. I sealed the windows, stocked firewood, and hung a single wreath on the door. Sometimes Dad called to ask about the weather, sometimes to tell me about the veterans he helped. Every call ended the same way. "I'm proud of you, Ev. I know Dad." It wasn't perfect, but it was human, and that was enough. On New Year's morning, the first snow fell. I walked outside in boots and flannel, steaming coffee in hand. The air glittered with frost. My reflection shimmered faintly in the cabin window, older, steadier, finally unguarded. I thought about the journey, the arrogance, the fear, the paperwork, the evidence, and the moment it all transformed into understanding. The Navy had taught me how to endure storms. My father taught me that peace takes just as much discipline. I turned back toward the valley, the sound of wind moving through pine needles like soft applause. "Peace isn't the absence of conflict," I said quietly to no one. "It's the art of defending it with grace." I smiled, lifted the compass to the horizon, and whispered, "True North." Then I faced the camera because I always record one final reflection for my viewers and said, "If you've ever had to fight for your own quiet, I hope this story finds you. Tell me in the comments, what does peace mean to you now? And if you believe every lesson comes full circle, subscribe, share your thoughts, and stay with us for the next story. Because here on Honorline, we don't just tell stories about revenge, we tell stories about redemption. The camera light blinked off. Outside, the mountains stood still, patient, eternal. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing guard. I just felt home.